I was invited to a viewing of something called the Magna Carta, and I was coming back from London, and I was reading my mail, and I saw that I was invited that night to go to New York to see the Magna Carta. And I said, wait a second, the Magna Carta is in London. That's where I just was. What's it doing in New York? I figured maybe they shipped it over or something. Turns out when I got there that there are actually 17 copies of the Magna Carta, and 15 in British institutions, 1 in the Australian Parliament, and 1 had been bought by Ross Perot in the early 1980s, and he had put it on display at the archives. He ultimately decided to sell it, and so it was going to go for sale that next night, and I was told it would go for sale to somebody who did not live in this country. They identified the likely countries that people would be the buyers from. And so I knew enough about American history to know that it had been the inspiration for our Declaration of Independence. All of our colonial charters more or less said, you have the rights of Englishmen, and that was taken to mean around the time of the Revolutionary War, the rights of the Magna Carta. No taxation without representation, for example. So I said, one of those should remain in the United States. There's 17, let's keep 1 in the United States. So I didn't want to tell my wife that she might say it's presumptuous to say I'm going to go buy the Magna Carta tomorrow. And I didn't want to tell my children. They might say, well, how much less money might this mean for us? So I just simply resolved to go back the next night, not tell anybody. I went there. I was not an art buyer at the time and didn't know Sotheby's. They put me in a little room, and they started bidding. And if any of you have ever been in auctions, you know you get carried away. And eventually I started bidding and bidding and bidding. Then they said, sold. So I couldn't hear who won. And then they came in and said, you won. Who are you? We've never seen you before. And do you have the money for this, by the way? And yes. So they said, there's 100 reporters there who want to know who bought it, or you can slip out the side door and take the Magna Carta with you once we get the money. And I said, actually, I don't mind talking to reporters. So I went out and said, look, I came from very modest circumstances. My father never made more than $7,000 or $8,000 a year. And in a country where my last name is a long Jewish ethnic name, that I could rise up and be able to afford something like this makes me feel that this country's been wonderful for me and my family. So I want to give this to the country as a down payment on my obligation to give back to the country for the good fortune I've had. So I'm going to put it. So I'm going to put it on the National Archives and as a permanent loan, and then when I die, it'll be there forever. And so I went to dinner right afterwards to see Chuck Prince, who was the CEO of Citicorp at the time, and I said, I'm sorry I'm late for dinner. I just bought the Magna Carta. It took a little time. And he said, okay, sure. So next day, it was on the front page of the New York Times, and he called me and said, I'm sorry, nobody ever come to my house with an excuse like that before. They were late because they bought the Magna Carta. He didn't believe me at the time. So actually, now I started getting hundreds of emails from around the world. If you want to buy a Magna Carta for that price, I have one. So it turns out they're all fake. So I have this one, and that's the only one that's in the United States, the only one in private hands. And then I got interested in other buying historic documents. As you and I know, I bought a number of rare copies of the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, the 13th Amendment, which ended slavery, the Bill of Rights, and many of these historic documents. And in every case, my theory was not to put them in my home, but to put them on display at the National Constitution Center, at the Smithsonian, the Library of Congress, the National Archives, Mount Vernon, Montpelier, Monticello, places where people could see them. And the theory is simply this. The human brain has not yet evolved to the point where when you see something on a computer screen, it's exactly the same as seeing it in person. For the next, hopefully, 100 or maybe 1,000 years or 10,000 years, when you see something in person that's the original, you are more likely to be inspired by it. So if you see it, you know you're going to see the original Magna Carta, you're more likely to read about it in advance. If you have seen it, you're more likely to read about it afterwards. So rather than see what the Magna Carta looks like on the computer screen and just you forget about it, if you go visit one of these original documents, you might be inspired to learn more about it. And if you learn more about it, you'll know more about our history. And if you know more about our history, you're more likely to be a more informed citizen. I have a theory that the people who are more informed about our country and our citizenry are going to be better citizens, and we have better citizens, more informed citizens, we might have a better democracy.